Welcome to the Hangar Z podcast, brought to you by Vertical Helicasts and in partnership with Vertical Valor Magazine. We get a ton of questions from people asking how they can break into the public safety aviation career field. So in this episode, we're thrilled to explore the diverse pathways into public safety aviation careers, like airborne law enforcement, aerial firefighting, airborne search and rescue, and the airborne emergency medical services. Join Rob Munday, Stef, Maier, Mike Calhoun, and Dave Callen, who share valuable insights on breaking into the public safety aviation community. We'll uncover the essential skills, personal attributes, and relevant experiences that can set you apart in these high-stakes fields. From the significance of training and volunteering to the impact of mentorship and networking, this conversation offers a comprehensive look at the challenges and opportunities that await aspiring public safety aviators. Thank you to our sponsors, Shotover, Robinson Helicopters, and Astronautics Corporation of America.
Welcome to the Hangar Z podcast, brought to you by Vertical Helicasts. The Hangar Z podcast is the first and only podcast dedicated to promoting and exploring the personnel and equipment behind the missions in public safety aviation. Join your host, Jon Grey, Jeff Ratkovich, and Jack Shanley.
Still southbound, skidding to a stop. Stand by here. Looks like you're getting ready to bail. Heads up, guys, bailing. Okay, the guy, he's running through the house, jumping the fence, through the shotgun, through something out. Grabbing the shotgun. Don't go over that fence. Don't go over that fence. Grab the shotgun again. He is armed. Stay there. Hold your position.
4 on the stop. You're in custody.
Good advising code 4 on the stop.
I can't believe I'm saying this, but welcome to the Hangar Z podcast. I'm your host, Rob Munday, and with me today is this eclectic group here. We have Dave Callen, Mike Calhoun, and Stef Maier. We'll introduce ourselves a little bit deeper as we get into the show here, but we've been wanting to do this for a while. I'm glad that it's finally happening, and it's something that we get asked about a lot. I would say it's probably our most commonly asked question between all of us through social media and even in person potentially as well. I would argue. How do I get to do what you're doing? How do I get into that line of work, and whether that's from an entry level position all the way up to something more experienced, but we get asked the question a lot, and so we thought we would address that and try and answer some of the more commonly asked questions, I would say. And this is not going to be the entire script, if you will, or the entire pathway, because it takes years, obviously, but it's a good way to get people started and get them introduced to some things to look for and to get them on the pathway to eventually getting to do some of the cool things that we get to do out in the field, which is pretty sweet. So I guess there's a bunch of different kind of pathways to get into it. We know that. That's why I've got these group of gentlemen here with me as well. And you guys I'm going to let you guys speak to your own areas of expertise. We all have our own sort of fields, and there's a bit of crossover there as well, but we'll get to that as we work our way through. But there is definitely, I would say, a lot of ways to do it. Fair assumption?
Sure.
Yep, I would say so as well. From our perspective, we're here this week doing some training with the Riverside Sheriffs. You can there is a training element to it as well, but there's also ways to just get straight into these types of work from the ground up with almost no experience as well. So we've broken it down into a couple of different categories, but I think one of the limiting factors across the board, and the guys that have both sent out the quotes for things like training to get started into this, and then the folks that are actually receiving the training and trying to get those opportunities and those pathways going, is that it's expensive, right? Particularly the flight time. I mean, Mike would know, Stef would know, like flying big, expensive aircraft, especially if you want to get into the EMS side of things and the bigger aircraft. I mean, flight time is really, really expensive, and that is kind of what we do. Flying just there's not a cheap way to do it. And so we need to get creative. We need to get there has to be ways to accomplish that. And every agency, every different company that you talk to that's trying to do this is trying to find ways to be efficient and be really kind of streamlined with their hiring process. And to try and train someone from the ground up is a real challenge. And so every agency, no matter who they are, is trying to bring someone on board with as much prior background experience as they can, I think, to help that process. And unfortunately, it all comes down to money a lot of the time, right? So I'm going to ask you guys, I guess, a couple of different questions as we go through. But again, we want to kind of keep it pretty low level to start with, and then people, hopefully it'll give someone an opportunity to go and ask some more questions and kind of move forward from there. But for I guess the three different categories or the three different positions that are most commonly involved in these types of work are pilots, obviously. So we have a couple, Dave and Mike are here as well, to talk from the pilot perspective. There's hoist operators, crew chiefs. So Stef and I kind of fall into that category, depending on what we're doing on any given day.
Yeah.
And then to maybe a lesser degree, me, and a higher degree, Stef. The vast majority of the work that actually happens in this country is flight medics, right? Or in this continent, in the world, like they're flight medics. You know, there's a lot of medics and even a higher ratio of like medics to pilots or medics to crew chiefs. That's probably like in terms of a population base, there's a big chunk of those guys.
There's a huge population of flight paramedics and flight nurses out there. So yeah, that's a large portion of the EMS aviation industry there.
I would say so. Yeah. And then, you know, there is that law enforcement side, or there's firefighting, and we'll get into that as well. But they typically, on the job, they kind of fall into one of those categories, right? It's like a crew chief type position, a pilot position, or you're on the ground and doing things like firefighting or a medic position or something like that. And they all interface with aircraft in different ways, but they're sort of they're a small chunk of a quite often a bigger division of an agency, whether that be police or fire or whatever you want to call it. So what I'm going to do is as we go through, and we can't spend obviously too much time on each one here, but I just want to get from you guys, and we'll kind of bounce back and forth between the group here. I'm going to ask you guys 3 questions. So I'd like you guys, if you can, to give me just a couple of examples of agencies that are actually doing the type of work that we're talking about. So, you know, if we're going to talk about EMS, let's just get a couple of examples. And the idea there is just to allow people to go out and actually do a little bit of research. Start somewhere to go look at a couple of different like agencies that are quite well known within the industry, and just start to do a little bit of research about, you know, who they are and what they do and who their prospective employer might actually look like and what kind of stuff they get up to, right? I guess the next thing is sort of the pathway to get to a point where that organization would be willing to potentially look at hiring you, you know, so some of that background experience, some of that training, some of that education, maybe where you've worked previously to sort of get to that point. And I'm more talking about that like a resume building perspective, like what would their resume kind of look like in terms of skills and experience. And then I think the third question, it's probably underrated, but it's something that I think is crazy, super important, is maybe more from like a personality, or not like hard skills, but like soft skills. Like what kind of attributes would you guys be looking for if you were actually going to hire someone to come onto the type of agency that you work for? You know, what type of person are you looking for in terms of what we'd call them soft skills, I suppose, wouldn't we? Like,
yeah, that's a great point. It's a very important point.
Yeah, it's huge. It's more than I think people think, is that, you know, I don't ever want to say that someone isn't cut out for the work, but it's a lot harder for certain personality types to jive with the team and to fit in and to be successful. So I think, you know, no matter where we work, I think we would all agree that there's quite often it's like you can kind of tell who that person is. Yeah. Right. They are not cut from the same jib, but they kind of fit into the same mold a little bit for sure. So without further ado, I guess we'll get going here. And in no particular order, I think we can kind of bounce our way back and forth. But one of the bigger ones, and especially something for this podcast and the type of work that we do, is the police, the law enforcement side of things, right? So we have both Dave and Mike here. And I guess, Mike, you've drawn the call it the short straw, I guess, for the honorary co-host of the podcast. So yeah. Do you want to kick it off with the police, the law enforcement side of things? I guess there's the TFO and the pilot perspective, but feel free to kind of hit on both and see how that looks.
So I've been a deputy sheriff for Riverside County Sheriff for 23 years now. Been in the air unit for 17 now, and I tell people that I wanted to be a helicopter pilot so bad that I became a cop in Southern California to do it. So that was my path and my choice. How I came to that was, I always wanted to fly. I wanted to be a pilot, and I didn't do it in the military, and I didn't know what my options would be afterward. Thankfully, I was working in an emergency room at the time, and I was talking to a nurse friend of mine, and her husband was an LAPD officer, and I was telling her the situation, and she told me that her husband said, "Hey, you should think about applying with law enforcement, because a lot of the agencies will train you from within and become a pilot internally. You just have to be a cop first."
Right.
So I researched it, I thought about it, and I thought, you know what, that's something I can do. So what did that take from me? Well, I became I applied with my department, and I got hired. So I had to go to the academy, had to go to a 6-month academy, and then I had to work in the jails for a couple of years. and then I worked patrol. And I actually kind of fell in love with patrol. I looked at it initially selfishly as this necessary kind of impediment in the way of my goal, but I really started liking it. And so what I did was I made a plan that if I don't get selected for my aviation unit, I still want to become a helicopter pilot in the private route. So when I was working patrol, I got my private helicopter in 2005, and my plan was, hey, if I never get selected to the aviation unit, my backup plan is to eventually become a CFI, build some time, and when I retire, my afterlife job, I can maybe maybe like an EMS job as a pilot. But thankfully, I got picked up with my unit as a tactical flight officer. So typically, that's what most law enforcement agencies will have. You have a pipeline for pilot that starts as TFO. And in our unit, we have kind of a dual track now. We have a paramedic EMT rescue technician route you can come in, or you can come in if you eventually want to be a pilot, or if you only want to be a TFO for the rest of your career, then you would start with the tactical flight officer route. So what are they looking for? To be a great TFO, you have to first be a great cop. And it's harped on, and it's everybody agrees, and there's been some great people on here talking about that same thing, but you really have to be a good street cop first. So look at that first as, okay, this is something I need to learn. I need to learn the tactics. I need to learn the temperament, and kind of get stress inoculated a little bit on the street, and then start looking for those things that can help yourself get to the air unit. And the number one thing that helps you get to an air unit in law enforcement is having a very good reputation as a street cop. Like we're going to talk to your partners. We're going to talk to people that work with you, your supervisors, and ask about, who is this guy? What is he all about? Before we would invest that time, because so much more now is involved with what kind of person is this person?
Right.
So many organizations and companies or so forth are looking for that kind of that intangible, personality factor. Will they fit in? Is he a good fit? Is a kind of a catch-all, but there's a lot in there. Is he a good fit? Is she a good fit?
Totally.
And we could talk about that, but there's a myriad of personality characteristics and so forth. But basically, don't be selfish.
Yeah.
Do what needs to be done. Don't be lazy. And so you become a tactical flight officer typically, and if you're good, you got to go through that training. And I'll tell you, that was the hardest job in law enforcement that I ever had to learn. Probably one of the hardest jobs ever. Dave would probably agree. Learning to be a TFO and then being a good TFO, continually learning and progressing on that takes a lot.
I don't think people understand how much of an important role a TFO plays in a TFO pilot partnership in the aircraft. People think that the pilot's the star of the show, but quite often I think you guys
TFO is more important than
totally.
the
And
pilot.
this is coming from two
absolutely.
pilots sitting next to me here, but the pilots are openly saying that I think that TFO runs the show. They're the ones that are kind of coordinating things, and the pilot's just kind of getting you A to B. And don't get me wrong, I'm not undermining the job of the pilot, but the TFO is a very underrated position for sure. I think everyone knows exactly what a pilot does and how hard that job is. I think that's a given. But the TFO, is a very underrated job.
In order to do that job well, that's who I look for because that's our kind of our pipeline for pilots. So when I'm looking at a TFO in an interview, we'll have a sit down interview with some scenario questions, and those that do well, we'll invite them to a fly along, like a flight check. And we'll put them through some scenarios, but in the air with a little altitude, a little noise, a little confined area, a little stress, and kind of see how they respond and how they can perform. No one ever nails it. We're just looking for that aptitude. Is there something multiple here that's trainable? And how do they handle stress? Are they someone that just blames everybody and everything else for their poor performance? Or do they fall on the sword? Are they a good person like that? So, because what I'm looking for, I'm also looking for, would this guy be a good pilot?
Right.
Would she be a good pilot also down the road too? And because typically many law enforcement units, you can stay there for the rest of your career. I've been in the unit for 17 years and been very blessed and thankful to be a part of that. So what I'm looking for then is okay, what kind of pilot would they be? And what kind of pilot am I looking for is someone who is a purposeful, methodical thinker, but can also be strategically aggressive when necessary. And there's a lot to that. There's a lot inside there, but basically someone that can do the mental math really quick when necessary to do something could be very borderline risky, or can know when to say no And
Right.
one of my favorite quotes was from astronaut Frank Borman, and he once said a long time ago, "A superior pilot uses his superior judgment to avoid situations that require the use of his superior skill."
Totally.
Now, that's not being a scared pilot. It's not, saying no to everything, but knowing when to say no strategically and knowing when you can push your limits of your experience to accomplish something. And that can be difficult. You don't want somebody that's always going to be a people pleaser and always want to say yes, yes, yes to every mission. But you also don't want a guy that's, there's a cloud 20 miles away and he doesn't want to fly.
Right. We've seen both. Yeah.
We've all seen both of those kind of things. So
I think that's good.
yeah, so that's the path I took. And then once you get there and you prove yourself, there's a lot of heavy lifting, a lot of hard work you have to do to prove to yourself and make it known that, hey, I do want to be a pilot. And now you certainly don't have to have flight experience in many units like mine. Right. But I got my private helicopter just to kind of as the backup, and it also made me a little bit more marketable and maybe more appealing in the application process. And it helped me, get to a pilot spot a little bit quicker. So
right.
And then once you get in there, like in my department sent me to a professional flight school for a commercial helicopter rating and a turbine transition, and everything else after that. All the training became in-house. And then there's a certain process that goes in there. But if that's what you want to do, if you want to be a pilot, at least with my department and several other departments are similar to that. That's where you would have to start in law enforcement to be a good cop. And then there's other avenues too with many like fire departments, but they'll hire and EMS too. They'll hire civilian pilots, but that has a whole other branch off of that. We can talk about where they got their experience and what they look for too for that.
They're not hiring 100-hour pilots. You're coming in with a range of experience. And just like you talk about with a TFO where you're looking for a person that can make good decisions and has that kind of critical thinking.
Yeah.
If you show up with a resume that has other jobs listed that require those same kind of skill sets, they're going to be quite an appealing candidate potentially, right? Like if they're coming in, if they're 20 years old and they've just graduated from college and don't really have that life experience, you got to wonder like where are they getting that critical thinking and that sort of thing. No different to a pilot. If you're coming in and you've flown heli skiing or you've flown in the mountains or you've flown utility or you've flown some other job that helps with those skills, then obviously that makes that pilot more appealing to try and bring them through the pipeline, right?
Yeah. Like with the fire service, typically they'll hire professional civilian pilots, and there is an experience that they draw from that. Typically like logging, a lot of vertical reference, maybe heli skiing or utility work, because those skill sets are so concentration intensive that they're looking for what is the highest likelihood of success to translate into learning how to hoist with a helicopter, because nobody really does that in the civilian world. So you're picking from a similar flight discipline.
The best you can get.
Yeah, and that'll usually translate into, okay, he was a really good long line pilot, so he'll probably be a really good hoist pilot. So that's who we want to look for, not someone that was, doing something like, not to minimize anything else, but like the tour industry or something where you're going A to B. It's not, using vertical reference.
That's a great stepping stone.
Yes.
But it's not the only stepping stone between getting a license and basically flying fires, in a 60 or whatever. Like there's a few more stepping stones in there as well. And that is a valuable skill and has some relevance, but there's got to be some other stuff on the way as well.
Yeah.
Cool. Great. I mean, I think we could sit here and talk about it all day, but I think that's a really good kind of fundamental starting point anyway. I think that leads nicely into the fire side of things as well. And I mean, I can speak a little bit to this, and I'm sure you guys in the industry can kind of add to it as well. But I think from my perspective, having done quite a lot of wildland fire myself and have worked my way through the aircrew positions and in the backseat anyway, I'm not a pilot, but there's kind of like the wildland fire route. And then there's also, call it the city fire or the structural fire, whatever you want to call it, where like bigger cities like LA City, or some of those bigger cities have fire departments, and then they have an air unit that can kind of work your way through like that. And it's the same in other countries as well, I'm sure. Like some of the bigger cities have got, fire and police and all these other different units that are working for them. I know the same exists in Australia as well. But from my experience, like in the wildland fire side of things anyway, I don't ever want to kind of rank different pathways or whatever, higher or lower, but I would say that to get into a helicopter and actually start doing something quite interesting in the back of a helicopter, particularly wildland fire, is one of the easier ways to get into it. When I, started doing that at 21 years old, I really had just done a little bit of outdoor stuff. I enjoyed being outdoors. I enjoyed camping. I enjoyed, that sort of thing, and physical labor, hard work. That it was kind of my jam at the time. And someone suggested this to me and was able to basically apply. And I did 1 year on a ground crew firefighting, like here in the US, it'd be like a helicat crew or something like that, I guess is kind of the pathway through. But hotshots, do a lot of time on the ground first, and it's just basically just hard work. And I know quite a few people that have gone through that pipeline. And within a year, I'd done a year on the ground, and within a year I was in the back of a Huey rappelling out of it. And you go through that process, and then that leads to like a crew chief type position where you're not the one on the rope anymore. You're the one dropping the ropes and sending the guys and coordinating everything from the air. And that's certainly, one pathway. And now, especially particularly in the States, like a lot of different fire crews, whether that be state or federal through the US Forest Service or, the state fire departments like Cal Fire or something big like that. I mean, they have robust programs now. And you look at the kids that are, and I say that now as almost a 40-year-old guy, but you look at the kids, and I was one, but they're young guys. It's a young man's game and a young woman's game, and it's hard work. And it's a real great entry-level position, because nowadays the opportunities to progress really quickly in those fire departments can be quite rapid, even compared to structural fire or like a city fire department. Like you can really accelerate your way through those programs quite quickly. And then I know as well, working for, we're here in California, so LA, city fire is a great example. But a lot of those types of departments, you do start off as a firefighter working on an engine, and then they have an air unit. And so just like you were talking about, Mike, with the police side of things, you kind of work your way in, and they hire, and likely they're looking for guys that are captains in positions like that, and girls that are captains in positions like that. And then Cal Fire does the same thing. You kind of work your way through, and there's a progression. They have a sequence. They know what they're looking for the most part. But, we're going to start sounding like a broken record here, but it's the same kind of attributes, and I won't dig too deep into it. But like firefighting in general, particularly in the wildland side of things, it really is. It's just hard work. They're looking for folks that are physically fit, they're active, they like being outdoors. Hopefully it's not the first night they've spent in a tent. Like you're into that kind of stuff. You like being outside, you like working hard, you like interacting with people. If you've played team sports or anything like that, this is it. But in the work environment, right? Like you need to operate really well as a team and be okay with being uncomfortable and that sorts of thing. And there's a lot of crossover between a lot of other jobs as well, I think. But a lot of that sort of stuff, you're able to follow directions. It's not really a job where you're allowed to do a lot of like going rogue in terms of your thinking. Like you're given a job, you accomplish that job, and you don't really have a lot of flexibility to start going off on a tangent and doing your own things. So looking into fire agencies, whether that be, in Canada, British Columbia and Alberta both have like really robust wildland fire programs. Ontario is the same way. As you move further east, the wildland fire hazard drops a little bit, so it's not so much. But in the US, it's prolific. It's everywhere. Every state has some kind of fire program, particularly on the West Coast and particularly in those central, states. It's definitely more established, I would say. But every state's going to have something, and there's a lot of opportunity there, especially for people that are just trying to get into it. Whether it be medical or there's lots of different things that you can get within that and get it quite quickly, I think, compared to a lot of different other opportunities that we'll talk about now. But I think that kind of hits the fire thing a little bit. I think I've answered all of my own questions there that I came up with as well. But the other, probably the biggest one I would say outside of police and fire in the public safety world in both, Canada, US, and probably around the world is the EMS side of things. And I think there's probably just about no one better than Stef to talk to that, especially in this room anyway.
Lower the bar.
Stef, if you want to kind of talk about a little bit the air ambulance, and then particularly maybe give us a little bit of an idea of who's out there in the air ambulance world that starts to kind of dabble a bit more in maybe the rescue and the hoisting and things like that as well.
Thank you to our sponsor, Shotover. Shotover Systems is the leading developer and manufacturer of high-performance gyro-stabilized cameras with advanced real-time AR mapping and mission management, all backed by unparalleled custom training and support. Now offering the M2 multi-sensor system, sole 6-axis EOIR platform with 4K Ultra HD color and infrared technology. Ideal for law enforcement and defense. Offered with real-time AR overlays to quickly identify streets, weather, and traffic. Automated license plate recognition, 24 megapixel digital photographs, and automated steering and tracking.
Yeah, I mean, I think the helicopter rescue world for EMS is so much different in the United States than it is in the rest of the world. When you go to Europe, a lot of those programs do both, right? But in the U.S., it's most EMS services are privatized. They're private companies. There's just not a lot of SAR capability or SAR attached to those. And you look at, I've been thinking here as we started talking about this, is like the two that come to mind readily are where I worked, were Travis County Starflight and then Intermountain Life Flight. I think they're two.
Mm-hmm. That's Austin, Texas, and Salt Lake City, Utah, in the US here.
Yeah.
Big organizations.
Everywhere else, the helicopter SAR seems to be attached to a law enforcement agency or like a Miami-Dade or LA County Fire. Someplace it's a fire department that has an air unit assigned to it. And it's just not that common in EMS. Most helicopter EMS agencies seem to be a private company that are not attached to a thing like that. So, yeah, so I can speak a little bit about, like, if you were a paramedic and you want to get into helicopter rescue and stuff like that. Like, my pathway was, first of all, I think everybody knows, or most people who know me knows, like, my mom worked for the same company that I did. So I was exposed to it from when I was a young kid. And so I didn't really know what I wanted to do. So I became a paramedic at one point, and I was a ground paramedic. And then I was fortunate that I had some folks that I worked with who got me steered in the path of rescue. And so I was a ground rescue guy. I was on a special operations rescue team for a number of years. And then a position to open up on the aircraft, and I was fortunate enough to get on that. And then I kind of stuck around and had been there up until the last couple of years when I stepped back and let some other folks take the reins and move forward with the program. But, for the EMS side of the house, I don't know if it's the easier path. I always think about it, I think it's easy because, like, say, I'll speak mostly about Travis County Starflight because that's where I worked, is you could get hired directly into the unit. You didn't have to be a paramedic on the ambulance side. You didn't but you still had to pay those dues because, like you said, and I think it holds true for the parent, you got to be a good paramedic. You said you had to be a good patrol officer. You have to be a really great patrol officer. The same thing extends there. You're just not paying those dues at, like, some of those units. You're paying those dues somewhere else. And so you're working for a department, you're working for an agency, spend your time on a ground unit, being a paramedic, doing something like that. And then, you could get hired directly into like Starflight in Travis County and immediately get into helicopter SAR. But you're paying those dues, those 4 or 5 years on the front end, on your own, somewhere else, and then you get hired in. So, it's similar but a different pathway. And so I would say out there, if there's, paramedics or nurses that are interested in the helicopter SAR world and they think, I'd like to do this, I mean, their pathway remains the same. You got to be a good paramedic. You need to work somewhere that's busy, a busy urban 911 system, because anybody who's done EMS knows that, like, helicopter EMS and stuff, that no one's calling you for a stub toe. You graduate from having to run some of those calls and you move on to, you're getting called for multi-vehicle mass casualty incidents with a lot of injured people. And so that's not the learning place for the most part. So most agencies want somebody who has a fair amount of experience, that 5-year range that they've been doing EMS. And so they get hired into the unit. So it's just not a place to learn, I think, for the most part. But, once you get in, I think, it's nice because they get hired directly into the unit and we can start focusing on their training. And we're looking for people, I think, that have a solid background in their EMS. They've invested time in their EMS career. I think about people who've, aren't just one dimensional. They're not just a paramedic, that they, have some search and rescue. They've gone out and they've taken a Swiftwater course. They've, you look at them and for me, if I look at, like, if I was going to hire somebody, that's what I'm looking for. I'm looking for not just the guy who came to work and went home. I'm looking for somebody who took on extra responsibility at their job, who has, invested their own time and effort to grow their career and build the foundation, not just have a foundation. They want to build an entire house and a career off of that. So I'm always looking, if I think about, like, who's a good employee, I look at people who have done that, who've spent the time and effort to advance their career even on their own. And so when I think of, that's what, for me, it makes a good employer, makes a good partner. I want somebody who's willing to put in the extra time, even if it's on their own time.
Right.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and I think that's a really kind of, it's an interesting pathway for sure. I think there's a lot of opportunity there as well. And I think there's a lot of medics, like a flight medic that you talk about, like all across this country and all across the world, like flight paramedics that are working in phenomenal agencies.
Yeah, absolutely.
That just don't have a hoist program. And maybe because they don't need one, maybe because there's just hasn't been that opportunity there or whatever. But you would be able to take a very, very highly qualified flight paramedic out of a bunch of different programs that don't have a hoist program and plug them in the one that does. And they're going to transition across really, really well.
Yeah.
So if that's something you're interested in and you're living in a town or a state or a city or whatever that doesn't have maybe a hoist program, I don't think, the message maybe there is that don't think that the experience that you're getting there is invaluable or not valuable, because there is like that experience that you're gaining in the aircraft. Like, we've all seen it, like people that haven't had that exposure to helicopters and aircraft in general, there's the deer in the headlights, right? Like the first time they ever get in one, if you talk about stress inoculation, like if you've ever had the chance to eliminate that stressor from your body, then you're able to perform in those quite strange environments, quite honestly. Like it's quite a foreign place for a lot of people to be. If you can eliminate that by being a flight paramedic, then transitioning to a hoist program or something's much easier, right?
Yeah, I think so, because like you said, you're paying that time. You've developed, you're comfortable working around the aircraft. You hopefully develop some of those air crew skills, that CRM, that communication piece. That it's a small unit. Most places, if we were going out and doing a hoist, most of the time, remember, it would be me, you, and Mike or Dave.
That's
There's
right.
3 or 4 of us. So you've developed that interpersonal relationship, those skills to be able to deconflict things, be able to get past something and still complete a mission. And so, you're out flying, you're just with a private company and you don't do helicopter SAR and you want to get into that. Yeah, you're paying your dues. That time is extremely valuable. It
really is.
You can't really put a price on it, especially if you want to get into doing something like that.
Right. Yeah, and it's actually, I won't say it's easy is never the right word, but there are lots of opportunities out there in the world of flight paramedicine for qualified ground paramedics.
Absolutely.
Like if you join an EMS organization, you spend a bunch of time on the ground driving around in an ambulance doing great work on the ground, you very quickly, I think, find yourself quite qualified to apply for an entry-level flight paramedic position. That's the only way to get started. I mean, you have to start that job with no flight time. That's really the...
Yeah, everybody started somewhere. Like I didn't have any flight time. I didn't know anything about helicopters when I first started. And I think that's an important, thing to remember, is that we got to give somebody the opportunity. And for me, when we also talk about that, I look at, the things I talked about, but then I look at personality, like you're a self-starter, how do you get along with? And some of that's hard to judge in just a brief interview, but those are the things that I think are important when we're looking at somebody to get into the unit.
Right. Yep. Yeah, agreed. It actually leads us really nicely into something we chatted about prior to hitting the record button here as well. But we were just at Echo at the conference that happened out in Virginia just a couple of weeks ago. And a great conference. We've been many years in a row now, and it's a great spot. Speaking
of Echo, like as we talk about getting into this, they have a great program. The small plug for Echo here. They do the future flight crew, so they take people who want to get into that aviation, and they have kind of a pathway where, hey, I'm a ground paramedic or I'm a nurse, and I want to develop some skills. They have a program and a pathway that people can apply to that will help them maybe be a better candidate for someone that's hiring. So they do a really great job.
Yeah, and I'd say for those folks listening who might be starting to perk their interest when we talk about flight paramedics and EMS in general, like that is a really good, go check out Echo, ECHO, just exactly as it sounds. Every coast helicopter operators now, but it used to be East Coast. Now they've expanded out, and huge advocates for EMS in the country and across the world, and just a phenomenal organization.
Yeah, they put on a great conference every year.
Love working with those guys. Yeah. Super valuable resource. So I would check that out as a potential option there for sure as well. Moving along, we're kind of halfway through our list here, but another pathway, and it's maybe a little bit of a unique one, is the volunteering side of things. Everyone thinks about these jobs as being paid, but there are people out there that are quite happy with whatever they have for a day job that has nothing to do with search and rescue. There's bankers and there's lawyers and there's secretaries. There's people out there that you wouldn't think would have anything to do with that still have a passion for the outdoors and still have a passion for helping people, or maybe have some skills from a previous life or whatever that are valuable. But maybe don't want a full-time job, or maybe they're looking for a way to get into it, like we talked about, a stepping stone, right? And I've had that experience. I mean, I grew up in a family of volunteer firefighters. Like, that was quite often a pathway to lead into full-time firework, which leads into full-time helicopter. Like, there is pathways there too with things like air attack and stuff like that in Australia. You know, if you want to get into a plane that's basically telling 747s where to drop their load, like that's a pathway. You got to start somewhere, and a volunteer firefighter is a way to do that. So volunteer search and rescue teams are all over North America. They're all over the world, basically. I've had a privilege, I guess, to work with a couple of them now, and you would be surprised if you're not familiar with a really switched on volunteer unit. I think Vegas has, you know, probably arguably, I hate to say it, one of the best in the country. I don't like to ever put that label on anyone, but super dialed in. I've worked personally with them, super dialed in group of guys. You know, Riverside's got the mountain rescue unit, and they're just phenomenal. I'm sure you've worked with plenty in Texas as well, Stef. And yeah, I have been involved and have worked sort of alongside and with where I'm at up in Canada, Squamish Search and Rescue. And yeah, some of the most dialed in individuals, paid or unpaid, you've ever met in your life. Like, these guys are true professionals, and again, being a volunteer unit, they're always desperate for help. You know, they want people that are willing to contribute, and a lot of that is attitude, right? Like, you don't necessarily have to have the world's best skill set, although a lot of them do. They'll take people that are willing to put in effort, and even just being exposed to those switched on people, you have training opportunities. You know, you'll get courses like Swiftwater, like rope rescue, like medical training. You'll get that stuff for free. And, you know, if you're willing to dedicate your time, and of course it's unpaid, but, you know, that's a specific type of person that is interested in doing that. But
it's monetarily unpaid, but it's, right. You are paid.
You're getting a heck of a lot in other
skill
ways.
Set. You're getting something for free that
giving
you
back to the community.
Yeah, you're giving to your community.
Yeah. And you know, a lot of these organizations, these volunteer units, they do have connections and relationships with Riverside Sheriffs, Las Vegas Metro Police. They have, you know, hookups with helicopter companies up in Canada. You know, there are opportunities there for flight time as well. And if you're willing to put in your time, and in the big scheme of things, it's probably actually not as much time as you would have to potentially put in to get into a unit like that through a paid program. So I'm not saying it's a fast track by any means, but it's certainly not a waste of time if that's your end goal, is to try and, you know, work your way through that pipeline as well. And yeah, I would encourage, no matter where you are in the world, like, it doesn't have to be mountain rescue. You know, there's marine rescue. There's lots of if you live on the coast somewhere, you know, there's lots of opportunities to get in like a marine rescue team. So there's pathways there from a bunch of different ways. And no matter where you are in the world, the first thing I would do is type in the name of your town on Google and type in volunteer rescue. And there will probably be a unit somewhere near you. And I guarantee it, if you pick up the phone and call them, they will be stoked to talk to you. You know, you may not be what they're specifically looking for right now, or, you know, you may be able to offer a certain set of skills, but they're not going to turn you away point blank. You know, they are going to be willing to have a conversation with you. They're going to want to hear about your experience. They'd be willing to share their experience and what they're looking for. And it's just like the conversation we're having now. And, you know, maybe that is a starting point for someone to look into that as well. It's probably the most diverse group of people you'll ever work with. You know, it's not that one track like we talk about. But,
and I could speak to like our Riverside Mountain Rescue Unit and Desert Sheriff Search and Rescue. They're the two volunteer units that we have. And I could tell you, not much tells me more about a person than volunteering to answer the phone at 2 a.m. to go up to an icy mountaintop to start a search for somebody. Right. That says a lot about that human being that would do that. And a lot of those organizations, they're all over, like you said. They do that. They answer that call when we need them, when we need to insert a bunch of volunteers on a wide area search, no matter what the terrain, even urban search and rescue environments where they're looking for a missing child or a missing person. And that is I look at that as, wow, this person is very altruistic and, you know, is not about self.
Right.
So that is huge. It is huge for if you're looking to further that down the road as either a pilot or a hoist operator / paramedic.
Right.
That is a wonderful avenue to start looking at. And not only that, but you get that experience, that you get some very technical experience as well, because we hoist our rescue volunteers as well. So they get that that experience, and they know how to behave in a helicopter and on a hoist operation and all of that. And it's very complex. And so I think that looks great if you're looking to do that. But it's just a wonderful, that would put that person to the top of the stack for me, how much rescue time or volunteer time they had.
It speaks a lot to their personality.
Yeah.
Right. Like we talked about that. It's one of the 3 questions I ask you guys, like, what do you look for in a team member? And, if someone comes to you and says, I spent 5 years volunteering for a team, I mean, that speaks a lot to their character, I think, and that it's a special kind of person. And I don't fault anyone for not, wanting to go down that, because it's a deep, dark rabbit hole sometimes. And it's a lot of work. It really is. And if you
stay with those rescue units for a long time, that says something too, because we go to their monthly meetings and they have accountability. I know, like RMRU, it's like, hey, you have to show up on these many calls. You have to come to these many trainings because it's proficiency and skill set, and you have to be there. Not just say you're a rescue volunteer, but you got to actually put in the work. No. And if you've been there for the longer you've been there, that looks good. Like, okay, you've put in the work, and they haven't like dismissed you or anything. So
totally, No, I agree. I think that's probably maybe like an underrepresented or an underutilized.
Yeah. I don't want to go completely off track here, but I thought of another pathway just as we were sitting here and I was thinking of pathways.
Yeah.
And there are a number of teams, like you look at Texas Task Force 1 or NC Hart. There are those marriages where the military has aircraft, they have hoist operators, but they don't have necessarily the skill set. They don't have swiftwater technicians or that search and rescue component necessarily inside the United States. And so there's that marriage of local agencies that get together on FEMA type teams that then get assigned to an aviation unit. So there is also that. And so if you're thinking about doing something, you want to get into helicopter stuff, looking into those task force. And I know that almost every state at this point has one. It's another avenue to be able to get into the helicopter or the aviation search and rescue world where I'm going to join this. And so you could look into, like I said, Texas Task Force 1, there are other NC Hart, and there are other places that do that all over the country. It's just another avenue if you're a paramedic, or you don't even have to be a paramedic. In some of those instances, you're an EMT, you're a volunteer SAR guy, and you can look at, I'd like to get on one of those teams. And it's just another pathway. So
we did some, we were at Echo, obviously, earlier in the month there, but we have also done some training as SR3 with the guys in Virginia. And that program is, it's the Virginia State Police owns and operates the aircraft that flies, and they have 412s and 407s. It's a phenomenal organization. But then they have also partnered up with, Chesterfield Fire EMS is out there and a bunch of others, but that's a fire EMS program, and they're providing rescue specialists into this like little conglomerate, like this weird little package that goes on there. And then you've got VC Health, like the health authority basically for Virginia that's providing guys like flight nurses to jump into that program. And it's this amazing little melting pot of, and like Maryland State Police kind of does something similar, MD Hart through that. Like there's some really interesting, and they've all kind of come to light recently because of, the hurricanes and all the stuff we've seen on TV. It's been wild, but I've learned more about more agencies in the last month than I feel like I have in 10 years, they all just pop out of the woodwork, and it's like, holy geez, I can't believe that there's so many different organizations out doing this that are so dialed in. And it's been pretty cool to see. But you're right, like, when the cream rises to the top, I get when things get crazy and things start happening, you start to see all these different agencies working together, and you realize that there's so much infrastructure out there that maybe you didn't even totally know about until recently.
Well, I just think it speaks to, if you want to get into this, there are pathways. There are a lot of different pathways. It's going to take some time and some dedication on your part if you're out there and you're thinking, hey, I want to do what Rob does. Well, there's a pathway to get there. It's just going to take you some time and effort. You're going to have to do some investigation to end up where he's at.
Yeah, absolutely. Dave, you've been rather quiet over there, so I know
I'm just soaking it all in.
We're working between the different options here, but you do get your opportunity now, I promise. So there's a couple of categories here that we're going to give you your way. So I guess through our exposure through the SR3 side of things, we've seen a few different agencies, and there's obviously a wide range of different options here. But given the group, we couldn't bring everyone in, but you have some military background experience and obviously have worked with a bunch of those agencies through SR3 as well. But maybe you can speak to the military side of things and how there is obviously a lot of different pathways through the service side of things as well.
Yeah, I think obviously the military route is probably the most obvious.
Yeah.
And, between Army, Navy, Air Force, Marines, Coast Guard, they all have to some extent some sort of a rescue program, whether it's just, dedicated actual rescue or some sort of a combat rescue like the PJs, CSAR type things. But all of those, units or branches, I guess, do have like a pathway to do it. And there's different jobs, but Steph and I, like Steph, you'd mentioned that, maybe sometimes it's not a assured thing that that's what you're going to be able to do. And obviously there's some risks. Some of those units in the military, might be something that you basically qualify for, but you have to make it through the training. And some of the training, like PJ training, extremely, extremely challenging, right? So, it's not a guarantee that you're going to make it through there. But all of the branches, regardless, do have opportunities for people to go in there and get into some sort of a rescue, fly an aircraft, hoist, fast row, propel, all those types of things. So, yeah, I mean, it's a pretty obvious thing, but I think anybody that's interested in that, obviously the best thing they can do is go talk to a recruiter, find out exactly what those jobs are, what they entail, what it takes to qualify, what it takes to make it through the training, and then I hate to say this, but if you don't make it to the training, what's going to happen to you? Because you've signed on with the military, so
yeah, you're going regardless.
Yeah, you're basically going to be kind of recycled into something else in the military if you don't make it. But
right,
I think it goes without saying that anybody that's that motivated and that dedicated to go through that training, if you really put the time and effort and you want it bad enough, your chances to succeed are going to be much higher.
Right.
But yeah, I think the military pathway is a pretty much a no-brainer as far as, a method to do it. It's probably, I don't want to say that's the easiest, but it's probably the most accessible.
It is for sure.
Yeah,
no, I think so. The risk is obviously there because like you say, you're committed long-term, like a lot of these other things, you could kind of just back out at any point and start going down a different pathway. But once you're kind of committed to that one, it's a big deal for sure. And a lot of folks do get in young and, once you're into it, and I think you're obviously committed, right? Relatively speaking. So, I mean, I think partly that's why we're sitting here today. I think that's kind of the point about this is do your research, like learn, it's free, learn as much as you possibly can about all the different options. And if you come out, and I'm not saying this 1 hour podcast is enough either, but it might get you pointed in the right direction, but go and do every bit of research you possibly can, learn as much as you possibly can. And then if you still think that any one of these options is for you, now you're in hopefully a better position to start digging into that as well. But I mean, we're speaking from the US side of things right now, but I mean, every country has some form of military. I mean, here in the US, there's the Navy, there's the Army, there's the Air Force, there's the Coast Guard, there's the Marines, right? Like there's the obvious branches and they're all, every single one of them has some kind of aviation rescue, helicopter rescue capability and medical capability. So yeah, I think there's all those pathways and different people are probably attracted to different options based on their interests and a bunch of other factors, but they're all available options for sure.
Yeah, for sure.
Thank you to our sponsor, Robinson Helicopter Company, the choice for unrivaled safety and reliability so you can accomplish any mission with confidence. For more than half a century, Robinson has been at the forefront of the helicopter industry. From the R-22 to the R-66 turbine, Robinson makes helicopters accessible so more people can accomplish more missions. Climb higher. For additional information, visit www.robinsonheli.com.
A couple more on the list here as well. One that I think is maybe not yet super applicable in the US. I think it will grow for sure. But, I also recognize that there could be people in other places that are listening to this too. And I can certainly speak to that experience from out of country here in the US and even out of Canada as well is the private sector. There's lots of private air ambulances flying around and maybe not so many here in the US that are doing hoist work. But, I was able to get some great experience in Australia. A lot of people that were to Google online or search on Instagram or whatever, they see big names like Westpac. Westpac is a bank, but they are the naming rights sponsor for the majority of air ambulances in Australia, and companies like Toll in Australia and these other little organizations. What you don't realize is that behind the scenes of those rescue helicopters that are doing some amazing work, they're basically like a charity or a trust that contracts a private company locally to provide a helicopter, and then they start hiring medics and pilots and hoist operators and crew chiefs and guys like this to come in and basically deliver the service. But they get a naming rights sponsor. It's all kind of volunteer, or not volunteer, but like charity based. There are volunteers working for those organizations as well. And a lot of those organizations, and I can say from experience in places like Australia and New Zealand, will hire someone off the street with no previous experience. And they will start training you as a rescue specialist from the ground up with no prior training. So you might have had volunteer firefighting, you might have had, some other background like that. But there are, a lot of the folks in Australia particularly are coming through with like a surf life-saving background. So they've spent a lot of time patrolling the beach. They're a lifeguard basically, right? And that leads them into the opportunities to work with helicopters, and then you kind of move forward from there. But, in the UK right now, they're hiring Bristow is another big company, huge company, hundreds and hundreds of helicopters across the world, and they operate in just about every continent on Earth. Bristow is still to this day running cadetship programs for both pilots and hoist operators, rescue swimmers, the whole gambit, right? And they're basically pulling people, not off the street necessarily. They have background experience in other fields, but they don't have any previous helicopter experience, and they're willing to basically bring you on and train you up. It's called ab initio, so from scratch, right? And that's happening in Australia right now. PHI is another big one. PHI, Bristow, CHC, big companies. And then you can start looking at all the smaller stuff like type Westpac, and then start looking for rescue helicopter, and you'll find 5 different options, across Australia and New Zealand for sure, but other organizations as well. And I've had the opportunity to work for Blackcomb Helicopters on the west coast of Canada. That's a private company. They just own helicopters, and we've contracted our aircraft to volunteer search and rescue teams. So I was able to get an opportunity there as a hoist operator. Cougar Helicopters is on the east coast of Canada. Again, a private company, but it's providing offshore oil and gas. Bristow is in the Gulf of Mexico right now, flying offshore, doing offshore search and rescue for oil and gas. And all of those companies are private companies. You can go onto bristow.com or whatever the website is right now and look for job opportunities, and they are posting right now for hoist operators. Like, there's always new opportunities like that around the world. In places like Ireland is modernizing its Coast Guard system right now and are applying through Bristow. All over the world, there are opportunities right now in the private sector as well. So they're looking for all the same things that we've hit on, I feel like, a lot. That aptitude, that prior experience, that positive attitude, that teamwork, like that's all the same things they're looking for. But it's certainly a very accessible pathway for the right people. And, back when I started getting into this work, the way that I first started looking, my first hoist job was in Australia doing that type of stuff. And I reverse engineered it. I went online and I found the job ad and I looked at the prerequisites and I just started ticking. I got a highlighter and just got it. So you go do underwater escape training. You go get your first aid certificate. You just start ticking basic boxes that these guys are looking for. I started calling people, talking to people and finding out, what they're looking for, and just start working backwards. If they tell me I need something, I go get it. And then I call them back and I say, well, I got it now. What do you want me now? They tell you the next thing. You get it. You got it now. What do you want? You just keep working backwards from there. So,
well, you mentioned the private industry, and I was thinking of, in terms of hoisting and stuff, like wind farms and harbor pilot transfer, which I know you did at one point. There's another avenue to get into this industry it's not necessarily SAR focused, but there are avenues if you wanted to hoist.
Totally.
There are other private companies out there. And so I was thinking about that. I was like, that's another avenue that if you're interested in this, you could explore that. You could look at
absolutely
harbor pilot transfer and wind farm maintenance and places where they're using helicopters where it has nothing to do with search and rescue. It's the vehicle that, delivers people to their job. And sometimes that requires the use of a hoist. So there's just another avenue if you want to get into this and you say, how do I end up there? Well, look into that. See if that's something you're interested in.
Totally, yeah. I mean, in Canada, right, and it is fairly specialized, some of it. I'm not saying you could just necessarily walk into some of those jobs, but some of them could potentially end up being like more of an entry-level position, like in the power line maintenance in Canada, Blackcomb Helicopters, Ascent Helicopters is doing a lot of power line maintenance work, Come down to the States and you talk about offshore marine pilot type transfer stuff. Brim Aviation is doing a bunch of work out of Astoria, Oregon, and you are flying out, you're hoisting people to boats, and there are civilians working for those guys as well. Heli Service USA has just got going out on the east coast of the US in the last year or two and are doing phenomenal work hoisting to wind turbines. And I never want to say something's harder than another thing, but I see things like the wind turbine industry getting so big and relatively speaking, I mean, yes, there is complexities there, but there could be opportunities there, I think, moving forward for potentially newer people who are trying to cut their teeth and you know, to have opportunities in jobs like that where there's pathways there to get into some emerging fields, if you will, because no one has experience hoisting the wind turbines in the US. So, you know, you might have 20 years in the military or whatever, but if it doesn't apply, then you may as well hire someone new and train them from scratch potentially, right? There might be pathways there moving forward to open up these opportunities for people. So yeah, absolutely right, Stef. I think you know, the wind turbines and some of this other stuff that's coming, you know, becoming more common. Callen Helicopters in Vancouver has just started doing the marine pilot thing out of Vancouver, and yeah, like there's lots of opportunity. They're working with their local volunteer search and rescue team to potentially bring in hoist operators from that program. So the crossover is starting to become more, I'd say, obvious, and yeah, it's interesting to see where it's going for sure. I think the opportunities are not getting smaller. That is, I think it's pretty safe to say. Dave, we gave you a short break there, and we'll come straight back. We tried to break it up into a bunch of different categories. I think we've covered most of them. I left this one to last because I think you can probably speak best to it, and I didn't want it to interfere with anything else we've talked about. But there's also companies out there that are doing specifically training, right? We're providing training for people that are either doing the job or maybe looking to expand an existing program to start doing the job. And I thought maybe you could speak a little bit to that as well.
Yeah, there's a handful of training companies in the U.S. and there's some outside the U.S. as well. Obviously, SR3, you know, is one of them. As the owner of SR3, I'm obviously a little bit partial to us, but yeah, I mean, we provide quite a bit of search and rescue training with helicopters. There's some others out there as well. Priority Wind Rescue's probably the biggest one that kind of laid the pathway for everybody out there. They were kind of the first in the U.S. ARS, Air Rescue Systems, another one. So yeah, I mean, there's other options out there. Everybody provides really, really good training. Everybody kind of has a little bit of a different flavor and you know, as far as what they're teaching, but quite honestly, across the board, it's all going to be very similar, as it should be, right?
Right.
And you know, for the most part, what we're training and the other companies are training is larger organizations, though. It's either private companies on a smaller scale, but really police, fire, and military. It's public service agencies, the people that are out there doing the majority of the work, right? So it's pretty rare to train just an individual, which is really what brought this whole thing to be, as far as from our standpoint. You know, you and I specifically talking about this, you know, we have quite a few people that every year reach out to us and they say, hey, you know, I want to get into this line of work. I want to be a hoist operator or a rescuer or even a hoist pilot, you know?
Right.
So
and there's clearly an information void.
There is, which is what brought, you know, this to be, which is great.
Right.
But it is challenging because for an individual to come to any of these, you know, training companies and say, hey, you know, I want to be trained as a hoist operator. It's tough because you're talking about, you know, several hours of flight time on a turbine helicopter. You're talking about a pilot to fly it, an instructor to train you. And then if you're going to do live load hoisting, you need some people to get hoisted. You need, you know, potentially somebody on the ground if you're going to be training rescuers at the same time. So it's just extremely expensive. And it's,
right.
You know, anybody that has that kind of money probably do, you know, it's more of a, I don't want to say it would be more of a, something that they would just be to do to check a box or, you know, like it's on a bucket list thing.
Right.
But it would be very difficult. It really would. So, you know, we've kind of explored or talked about some options to run a course like that through one of our partners that could provide a helicopter, and we could provide the training staff and maybe say, hey, you know, if we have a certain amount of these folks and we open up the class of training, you know, could we then do training for a hoist operator and or rescuers simultaneously? And that's something that we're actually exploring here in the future. But, you know, unfortunately, at the end of the day, it's just tough because that's really not the clients that we're training. It's bigger organizations, you know. So the
right.
pathway really, for anybody listening to this that wants to get into the business, it's all of the aforementioned that everybody has discussed, you
right?
know? And I know that's not the easy answer, but
I think we are on, like SR3 and other training companies are certainly on that potential pathway. Like we may cross paths with you if you're listening to this and are interested in getting into this. There's a very good chance we will cross paths.
Absolutely.
But it's potentially not the right thing to do to come to us first. You know, like some of there's pros and cons obviously to both sides of things. We have people contact us and say, I'm interested in getting training so that I can start looking for jobs. But as you previously heard, like there's police, there's fire, there's EMS, there's wildland fire, there's, marine pilot transfer, wind turbines. Like if you come to us and then you go start looking for jobs, every training class that we deliver, and quite honestly, probably that everyone else delivers, is tailored to the agency that's receiving the training. And so if we come to Riverside Sheriff's Department this week, we are training them to their aircraft, to their techniques, in their environment, with their equipment. It's very tailored to their operation. And we could absolutely bring you in and train you to that same standard or any other standard that you wanted. But the chances that that's where you're going to land at the end of all this are statistically very low. There's a very good chance you'll find yourself somewhere else. And it's not to say that money was wasted, but it wasn't as well spent as it could be. Being me, I would rather them pay for my training for me, get the job, find the way through the pathway, and then we'll cross paths later. And guess what? You won't have to pay for it anymore because the agency is. And that's when you're really going to need that training. If you come and get hoist training from us or any other training from us, and then you don't need it for 2 or 3 years while you go through the pipeline of a sheriff's department or a fire department or whatever to get to a point where you can put that training to work, I'm not saying it's a waste of time, but I'm saying it may not be as valuable as it could be. So it's the chicken and egg thing. But like to Mike's point earlier, when someone shows up and says, I went and spent my cold, hard money out of my own wallet to deliver this, you're like, wow, this guy's dedicated. This girl's dedicated, right? Like, so it goes both ways. And
that does say a lot.
It says a lot. And I think there's two sides to that coin, right? Like if someone's willing to do that, we don't necessarily want to turn them away, but I think we want to be really, really realistic with them on what they should expect, what the pathway is. And that's partly what we're doing right now is we're not going to say that it's a waste of time, but you need to think very carefully before you part with that money. And it's ironic because I did exactly that.
Yeah.
That's what got me my job in Australia is I did go and do a 2-week training program and I paid money out of my own wallet. It was $12,000 back in 2010. It's a lot of money, but ultimately I got a job. So it's hard for me to stand here.
It is possible.
Yeah. It's hard to say that it's not the right thing to do, but I think there is an element of luck. There is an element of hard work.
But you probably also did that with another group. Did you go through that with a group or was it just, you just showed up and said, hey, here's...
It was a class of one. Yeah, it was a class of one, which is pretty wild.
Pretty non-standard.
And I recognize that is not normal. And so I maybe wouldn't encourage anyone else from actually doing that, even though I was successful and did do it. That's rare. But especially in the US that we've talked about, there is pathways there. But yeah, I think the other thing that I wanted to hit on, Dave, and just so we can kind of cover the full spectrum here is that, we do hire. There is a pathway to getting a job with, for example, SR3 or one of the other training companies as an instructor. Maybe a lot of what we're talking about doesn't apply to that, but just so we can kind of complete the circle and get the full picture. Like if you were to look to hire someone, what sort of skills or what kind of background would really like? What does the ideal resume look like to you? And then let's just say you get that ideal resume, you pick up the phone and call that person. What kind of attributes, what kind of personality, what kind of things are really like ticking boxes for you when you talk to that person?
Yeah, that's a great question. So there's a few things. For us, obviously, the experience, we have to start with the amount of experience that they have. So it has to be quite a bit of experience. It needs to be practical. And, it needs to be, quite honestly, I hate to say fairly advanced, but there needs to be a good amount of it. Ideally well-rounded. So that if you're talking just specifically about like say hoist rescue, there's a lot of different parts of rescue, but for hoist rescue, ideally for us, they would have experience day, night, open water, vessel hoisting, as much well-roundedness as they could have. Now, I would never hold that against anybody if, they didn't have all those categories checked because quite honestly, that's very difficult to do. All of you guys could attest to that, right?
Yeah.
But they do have to have a good amount of actual experience. That's kind of where we start. And then from there, there's a few things that are very important. And some of these things are difficult to judge if we've never worked around you or we don't know you personally or haven't had a good recommendation from somebody. But obviously you have to be a good instructor. Having some time teaching some of these things or all of these things is ideal. Having the experience is, it goes without saying, just because you have a lot of experience with something doesn't necessarily mean that you're good at teaching it. And likewise, right? Some people that are really good at teaching things that they're not good at doing.
Right.
But that's the other. So they need to be a good instructor or have at least some time teaching. And then for me, it really comes down to a couple other things, attitude and work ethic. And those are things that are very difficult. In my opinion, you can gain experience, you can learn how to teach, but as a person, you kind of either have those traits or you don't. You either have a really good personality and you have a really good work ethic. That's not to say you can't develop them, but especially by the time you're kind of in the years where you've hit that level to be an instructor, you kind of either have it or you don't. You have to be able to work well on a team. We work a lot of hours. I think anybody that follows like our Instagram or anything that we're doing on social media would look at it and say, oh, it's awesome. They're out there just doing all these things and it's cool. And they work with all these agencies, and that's absolutely true. But there's a lot of work. It's a lot of hard work. It's a long, long day every day for several days in a row minimum. And you have to be able to work together with all the other people, and you need to be able to work well. And that whole aspect of teamwork, what I look for is somebody that's willing to put the team first. So not only our team, but then the people that we're working with and training, kind of your needs need to be secondary to the needs of your teammates and to the people that we're working with. And, that's not just us. I mean, you look at any, military, police,
any high functioning team,
any high functioning team, sports, anything, right? Like those are all critical things. So yeah, that's really the main stuff that I look for. And then really we have people send us resumes pretty regularly, just out of the blue. Someone will just reach out and send us a resume or send us an email. And quite honestly, I love that. It's flattering that people would do that. And when we do receive those, we do our best to respond as quickly as possible. But the last kind of component to that is I really like to do like a video conference with that person. If I don't have the ability to sit down with them in person, but at least we can get some sort of indication of their personality, because usually it does kind of bleed through. And again, the personality is very, very critical, because they're not only having to work with us, but that person needs to be a really good ambassador for our company and work well with our clients. So it's huge.
Yeah, I agree with all of that. I think it's super truthful. As we sit here at God knows what time of night after just delivering a full day of flight training with the agency here. And
Stef is a perfect example of that. Yeah. Stef was in the water all day today. Long. He's in a dry suit that's completely filled with water.
Don't say that. That makes it sound like there was a slight malfunction.
There was a slight malfunction, but both of you guys worked really, really hard all day long. Get up early, grind it out, get the job done, and
here we are.
We do it again tomorrow. But
there's a lot of groundwork before preparatory stuff that has to happen.
There is, and I think to that point, and I think it kind of just like it's probably the same for all of these things, but particularly, and Dave can speak to it maybe for us. But I got two more questions for you, Dave. The ability to be adaptable, particularly with what we're doing, and the different types. Like one week we're doing this, the next week we're doing this, and even day to day, the ability, like what does that mean, I guess, like for a personality trait or a skill set, and with some background experience, like how does that fit in?
Oh, it's tremendous, because, things just not all the time go as planned, right? Whether the weather rolls in or something breaks or, a fuel trailer stops working, after the first flight. That happened today. But we have to be able to adapt, right? And at the end of the day, my philosophy has always been to not micromanage everybody, and I know that the people that are working here have the tools, and this goes true with the people on your team, the people, anywhere that we go in any of these types of organizations, they're all high functioning teams. So the people should have the skill sets and the drive, right? So the biggest thing for me is like, I put the mission out there to our team, and everybody understands the mission, and how we accomplish that may have to change, and it may change like, in the blink of an eye. So yeah, that's pretty common. It's to be able to deal with when a curveball gets thrown at you, you can't get frustrated. Right. And the biggest thing is like, okay, this happened. What are we going to do to get the job done? The job still has to get done. So that's a big part of it. And another one of those smaller things, but it ends up being huge in the grand scheme of things, is just not getting frustrated, right. When you're hot, when you're tired, when you're cold, when you've worked a long day, and then something goes wrong and you need to kind of pivot. Yeah. You can't get frustrated and start arguing and fighting with your teammates, right? So
yeah, totally. And I'm going to absolutely butcher the quote here, but like, there's the whole idea of when things aren't going well, you fall back to your lowest level of training, right, or your experience. And you guys can correct me if I've totally wrong.
Close enough.
I hope it gets the point across. Yeah. But Dave, you spoke briefly about the people that we're looking to try and get involved have ideally a range of experience, like I have a lot of respect, the deepest respect for all these different folks that are out there doing the work that they're doing. But if you've had the opportunity to do this and this and this, and maybe seen things from a different angle, when things don't go well, when things, we do need to pivot. I think the more that you've potentially seen, or the more different experiences you've had, and you're able to draw upon, Stef, I can't even imagine the things that you've seen in your career, like with your program. I know what Travis County's been through, and all the different aircraft and all the different techniques, like lots of different stuff to draw upon there. And you guys are no different as well at your agencies. But I've been very lucky to have seen a lot of different stuff myself. And I know that when, we come out and we do a training program somewhere, and something doesn't go to plan, and you've got to pivot and come up with a new plan quickly, the more you've seen, you fall back to that lowest level of training. It's like, I remember this. I remember the time that I had to do it this way. Let's try that. And, you can sort of manipulate things and make it work. So I think that's hugely valuable. Really, quite a good skill to have, and not everyone has it. I think it's quite valuable. The last point, and then I won't drag it on any longer, but maybe if you can just speak briefly as well to the operational experience side of things. So, how valuable or how useful is sort of real world operational experience when it comes to training, and when we have guys that are coming in, where does that sit on the scale for you?
You protect and defend. So do we. Astronautics' proven cybersecurity, connectivity, and upgrade solutions support helicopter OEMs and operators worldwide. When the mission matters, you need to trust that your avionics systems are secure, connected, and reliable, because lives depend on it. Continue to protect and defend. So will we. Contact Astronautics at www.astronautics.com.
Yeah, it's extremely important, because it's really difficult to come in somewhere and teach people that are, like Mike and your guys. You guys are a very high functioning team. You guys are doing very technical rescues. You guys are flying in, really, really tight terrain, challenging conditions. So for us, or somebody that wants to be an instructor to do this type of thing, to be able to come in and teach people like yourselves, or even to be teaching somebody that's never done it before, sure. you have to have that experience, and you need to be able to speak from that experience. So, it would be, I don't want to say a waste of time, but, if somebody that had very little experience would try to come in and teach your team, I think you guys are awesome, and you would be like, okay, well, whatever they have, I'm going to try to absorb. I know I can learn something from them, but, the point is, they have to have a lot of experience, and it needs to be practical, real world operational experience. And again, that kind of falls back to the point of this, where do you get that? You have to go out and do the job first. And, the more that you can do and build time, and, things are going wrong, and all of the stuff that comes with just, doing a job like that. And then once you decide that you want to teach it, the more years of that you can have under your belt before you start trying to teach it, the better. But it does need to be operational experience. There are, people that are able to, maybe do a job for a couple of years and then teach it for the next 40 or 50, and that's fine. But, in my humble opinion, this really isn't, there isn't a lot of room for that in our industry doing this.
I think it's a credibility thing too, right? It certainly doesn't hurt. So, yeah, thank you. Appreciate that. I think unless you guys have anything else specific on any of that, I have a couple of wrap-up points that I'd like to kind of just touch on quickly here. I want to try and capture lightning in a bottle here quickly, but I think there's a couple of things, and all the input today and everything you guys have shared has been super valuable. So thank you for providing the input. I think it's really important to recognize that this is just a snapshot of the industry. It's not everything. It's not everyone. I would love to have 20 people sitting on a panel here talking to us, but there's not enough microphones and not enough big enough couch, but it would be too rowdy. But there is so many different opportunities out there, and hopefully we've captured a little bit of sort of what that looks like here. I did kind of note down a couple of little generic kind of just summary pieces, and I think this is applicable to everything we've talked about here. But one of the biggest things I think in our industry now, and as we sit here recording a podcast about it, it's come so far, but it's always been this way. I think if you're interested in getting into this type of work, the best thing you can do is get out and talk to people doing the job. Don't email necessarily us or you or anyone else. Like, get out and actually physically meet people, talk to people, and get hands-on and face-to-face with people that are out there doing the real work that you want to do, and start from there. Because, you know, it's like visiting a new town that you've never been to before, and you know, go to a local bar and sit down and talk to the locals, and you're going to find out about things that you had no idea existed by even looking online these days, you know. And it's probably not the best analogy, but just getting face to face with people doing the job is going to make connections for you that you didn't know existed, unless you're willing to dig up and go down that rabbit hole. And I think that's shows a lot of commitment. It shows a lot of dedication. So I think getting out there and doing that, there's a bunch of different ways you can do that. Social media these days has obviously gone crazy. It's a blessing and a curse, I think, but LinkedIn, Instagram, you know, YouTube, wherever this podcast ends up, pretty much everywhere, I imagine. But, you know, listening to that stuff, that's a good starting point. It's not the be all end all. You know, following SR3 on Instagram is not going to get you a job necessarily, but it will potentially point you in a direction of agencies doing the work. It'll give you a good snapshot of what's going on. And you know, the cheat code is to jump online and look at the accounts of the Hangar Z podcast, look at the account of Riverside Sheriff's Office or whatever, and see the people that they follow. They're public accounts. You can go on there and you can see the people they're connected with, and you can kind of start to make that networking and start to figure out who's who in the zoo a little bit. And you'll get a feeling of who's sort of really involved in the industry and get an idea of Travis County stuff. Like, you know, they've got great social media presence, and you can get an idea of how the world works. And I think that's a really good starting point. It's not an end point, but I think it's a really good starting point to get out there. I think everyone's hit on this topic today, but I think it's just really important, again, to kind of summarize, to recognize this is a highly competitive job. Like, everyone wants this job. And if you think that you will just be able to walk in and get a job, I think there's a bit of a reality check that needs to happen there. I mean, we all consider ourselves, I can speak for everyone, very lucky to be able to do the work. But, I without sort of tooting our own horn, I suppose I can guarantee that everyone here in their own way worked very, very hard to get to what they have now and what they're able to do. And it didn't come easy for anybody. I don't think anyone that tells you it did is lying. So recognize that it's a highly competitive job. And when there's 100 resumes on Mike Calhoun's desk and they're all looking for a job, like, you need to do something to make your resume get to the top of the pile. And that might be different for all the different things we've talked about, but recognize that if you think that you're the only resume on the pile, you're kidding. Like, there's a lot of people that want the type of work that we do. And it's definitely humbling to be able to do it, but it's also important to recognize that it is competitive work. I think another big one that maybe some people forget at times is that your reputation within the industry is so unbelievably important. And you might think that it's a big industry, but once you're in it, you realize very, very quickly, holy geez, like, it's not that big. And
it's pretty small.
Everybody knows everybody. And if you have a bad attitude, a bad personality, and have somehow managed to find a way to progress through a career in this industry, people are going to know about you, and you know, for better or worse. If you're a great person and you give back to the community and you're good at your job, and you know, there's a lot of good things about that, then I think that's you're going to be well respected for that in the community, and it's going to really be beneficial for you. But at the same time, you can turn your entire career 180 degrees by saying the wrong thing or doing the wrong thing, and you know, you got to be really, really careful of that, I think. I don't know if to those 2 points, if you guys want to speak to any of that before we kind of wrap her up here as well. But that was a couple of points that I made. The last one that I'll just throw in there, and then we can kind of chat together here as well, is your willingness to relocate location-wise could be the difference between you having an opportunity and not. I've spoken to so many people that have been interested in a job, but are not willing to leave their hometown. You know, they grew up in wherever, and they're looking for a job there. And you say, well, there's great jobs in Texas. And they're like, well, not really interested in moving to Texas. Well, we talked about highly competitive. You've just put your resume back to the bottom. Like, you're limiting yourself and your ability to do that. We get people get a hold of us through, I'm sure, all of our various organizations all the time that are from other places in the world, you know, and they're interested in coming to the United States, to Australia, to Canada, wherever, to get a job. And the first question you should ask is, well, do you have a work visa to work in that country? And if the answer is no, your resume just went to the bottom of the pile. Like, you could still potentially have that opportunity, but if you don't have a work permit in hand to go to that country and work in that country, your life just got infinitely harder. So if you can't get one, or you can get one but it takes time or money, you need to make a decision whether you think that's a valuable thing to you to go and do that. But understand that if you haven't got one, there's 100 people that do. And they are immediately going to be more desirable than you are potentially. And that's just a numbers game. That's not your personality. There's nothing. That's just the reality of the way things work. So, yeah, I think recognizing a few of those different things and taking them into consideration and knowing what you're getting into, we don't want to deter anyone. We don't want to turn anyone away or make it seem like it's impossible. But I think being realistic about this stuff is really important as well. It is achievable. Yeah. We're testament to that, I guess. There are people that can slip through the cracks, but you can make it work. But
at least 4.
At least 4. Yeah. But I don't know if you guys have anything else to add to any of those points before we kind of wrap it up.
Yeah, I would add to if whoever's listening to this right now and is a decision maker and in a position to be a mentor to someone, they're going to start fielding these questions now, maybe as a result of this podcast. Be a mentor and be available for those people that are going to reach out to you. And, be kind about it and be helpful. Remember how you started. And maybe it was somebody that gave you a break or responded to a blind email. Mm-hmm. I'm proud to say that I have kind of an end result example right now of a guy that reached out. He reached out to me on LinkedIn a while back. And he was like, "Hey, sir, I'm a Marine 53 pilot, and I'm currently stationed in Miramar, California, and I'm looking to get out of the Marine Corps, but I want to become a law enforcement pilot. What can you tell me about it?" And so it turned into, many conversations, and we kind of took him on as a unit. He came to the unit and I walked him around, showed him everything. I told him about the job, and he went on a flight right along with the patrol guys. And, he was a deputy sheriff in Wisconsin, I think, before or right after he got out of college. And so then he went to the Marine Corps. So he wants to get back into law enforcement and keep flying at the same time. So I told him, like, here's what you're going to have to do realistically. And, you're going to have to go through the academy. And he's actually in the academy right now. And so he's on our radar, and he definitely meets a skill set. Like, there is an absolute aptitude there for sure.
Right.
He checks a lot of boxes. And, we've talked to him, and, we like him. He's got a great temperament and personality, because frankly, I mean, the overarching theme in this whole thing really, and in our society, I think as a whole lately, is, can you stand to operate with this person in a very confined, high stakes environment?
Totally.
And
day in, day out.
You cannot have an attitude or even, arguments in the cockpit or friction, anything like that. You have to be locked on and actually, if you don't like it, then at least have the ability to fake it while you're in those
for sure
critical phases of flight or those high stakes operations. And so, so I'm happy to say that he is almost an end result product. He's gonna finish the academy and do his patrol time, and that's a heavy lift. That's a big ask, and not everybody is cut out to take that route to become a cop in America right now. Frankly.
Yeah, totally.
I mean, that is a huge life-changing ask.
Especially when there's no guarantee that you're going to be able to go to an aviation.
There's no guarantee. You don't know it. So what can you do is try to make yourself stand out and make yourself no-proof in that interview. Like, I can't say no to Rob, man. This guy has just done everything. This makes sense. He's turnkey. He's done everything. And he's got heart, and he's got all these wonderful resume people vouching for him. And mainly it's that work ethic, man. Do what needs to be done, and that will just go a long way. Some people out there will spend that time to train someone who maybe doesn't have the prerequisite, but man, there's an aptitude there. There is a good trainable, coachable aptitude, attitude, personality there that is golden in our society right now, that people will bend over backwards, take a chance on you, and send you to maybe that Bell school, that Airbus school, to get to meet that requirement and put that money on for you in the front end. So, yes, just have a great attitude and help people out that ask you for help. Just don't blow them off. Be a good mentor, be a good ambassador of our of our industry because it is so very hard to crack into this industry. And it oftentimes takes a person that will take you under their wing and help you through that personally. And they'll remember that, and hopefully they'll pay it forward when they're an experienced aviator, hoist operator, paramedic, flight nurse later on, and say, hey, that was me 20 years ago, and I like that. I see that.
Right.
And it'll help a lot, I believe.
It's wise words for sure. I mirror it. Like, I literally just had the opportunity. I'd say I've been around long enough now, and not particularly long by any means, but to have that same win. Like, I had that experience when I first started getting into this. I had a couple of people, and I won't embarrass them on the podcast here because, 15 years ago, probably some of the emails I sent were probably ridiculous, but I did email them, and they were ridiculous emails, and they took the time to respond to me. And they are key people that at various stages through my career gave me the opportunities to get to where I'm at now. And it has come full circle. And I can say that, there are at least a couple of people now that have reached out to me that I've had the opportunity to try and help. And I won't take full credit for it by any means, but what a feeling to see them then get that first job. And it's like, dude, you're off to the races now. Like, I know you have the aptitude. I know you have the personality. Yep. You have that first job now. Good luck to you. Like, you're in the clear. Reach out if you need help, but you're over the hump now.
And those people,
what a cool feeling. It is sweet, hey?
Those people that responded to you and helped you out, chances are there's a really good chance the reason why they got that job in the first place is because someone saw that was the type of person that they were, that they would help somebody else later on. And that's what you really want, especially in this very close-knit environment. Like with us, we work 12-hour shifts, fire service, it's 24, 48s, and you're living with that other person for a long time, and you have to be able to get along. And because if you don't get along, and you've all seen it, if you don't get along, it will translate into the cockpit, and that can be an absolute safety issue.
For sure.
And I've unfortunately experienced that as well. I know other people have as well, and it has to be dealt with, and that's what we try to avoid. That's like worst case scenario where it gets to that bad, but we try to mitigate all that in that weeding out process and so forth. So
totally. And those high quality folks that are willing to kind of play that game and pay it forward and be a committed member of the community are typically the right kind of people.
Absolutely.
Right? So
that's what you want.
It all loops together. And I know that every single one of us here has had that experience. No doubt about it. We could go on about that all day as well. But do you guys have anything else to add? Otherwise, I think we're kind of good here. Dave, any final words of wisdom, or are you happy to wrap her up?
Well, honestly, I just have to agree everything that you said about the mentorship, right? Like, it's so important. And, I totally agree. Like, I wouldn't be where I was if it wasn't for the same type of people, that were able to invest in me. And that's something that I've tried to do as much as I can. And I know Stef has as well, Rob has as well. So
for sure,
anybody that's listening, if you already are fortunate enough to be in a position similar to the ones that we are, the more that you can do, the better, because there's people out there that are absolutely hungry.
Don't take it for granted.
Yeah, exactly. Don't take it for granted. The longer you've done it, the more you just kind of, I think there's an opportunity to take it for granted every day. And
there is.
Don't. You have to remember how much you put into to get into it in the first place, and just understand there's so many people out there that were in that same position that you were a long time ago right now.
Right.
And a little bit of that goes a long way. So
yeah, agreed.
Yeah, absolutely.
Sure. Stef, final parting words of wisdom?
No, I think you guys have all said everything for the most part that I think I would say. I think, for me, the most important thing is, I remember how excited I was when I first got into this. And I think it follows what you guys just said about being a mentor. And I think we talked about this before on a previous podcast. I was so excited. I remember how cool it was. Like, I was getting to do helicopter stuff and all that. And if I could do that for somebody else to get them that experience, I would do anything I could to try and help somebody out to get to that point, because we are fortunate. We've been, all four of us, we've been blessed with the ability to our careers are to fly in a helicopter, and how many people would give all that they could to have that as their career, right? And so I do think you're right. Like, you can't take it for granted, and you owe it to your department, you owe it to yourself, and you owe it to the next generation to put forth the energy that somebody else put into you. I may not always do it a great job, but I have always tried to do that, to give people those experiences, because I know how exciting it was and how excited I was to do it the first time. And I want to help people get that feeling, and I want them to then be able to pass that on to the generation beyond that. So,
right.
The last thing I would say, I think in closing, is just to be persistent. You can't be afraid to fail. You can't be afraid to take risks. Rob, I think you, out of all of us, understand really the value in being unafraid to take a risk and to take a bold step into a direction that you want to go. And it's easier said than done, but you can't be afraid to fail. You can't be afraid to apply for something and not get it. If you don't get it, it is what it is. But you should be tenacious in trying to achieve your goals. And
you miss 100% of the shots you don't take, right?
Well, you do. And, I would say too, that we all make time for the things that are important to us, whether it's your family, your career, whatever. But if these things are important enough to you, you'll invest in them enough to achieve the goal eventually. And it may not happen right away, and that's fine. But when it does happen, you're going to appreciate it that much more. And, you'll probably pour back into the people behind you even more. But yeah, that would be the last thing I would say, is just, you need to be persistent,
right?
Because we all were as well. And I think anybody else that's successful, doesn't matter what they did,
right?
What career they were in, they were very persistent, and they just didn't give up on their goals.
No doubt.
And absolutely. Be afraid to fail, right?
Wise words.
Right.
Absolutely.
Agree. Definitely. So I guess with that being said, we could go on forever, but what I hope to do here was kind of capture a short summary of a bunch of different opportunities and ways for people to try and get a start in this industry, and sort of what that looks like beyond those initial stages as well a little bit. And I hope that we've captured a little bit of that. And thank you to you guys for jumping in and sharing those experiences. There's more experiences out there. Like we said, there's lots of different pathways, and I encourage everyone to go out and do that research and dig around a little bit, and maybe in the show notes or in the description here, we can share some of those contact information for us particularly. I would say absolutely, if anyone wants to reach out, if anyone's listened to this and still has questions, by all means get in touch, ask questions at this point. But our hope is to be able to direct people to this, whatever it is, 90-minute conversation about the general state of the industry first, and then if they have follow-up questions, by all means, please reach out, and we'd be happy to help, or again, reach out to other folks who you think might even be more applicable to what you're specifically trying to get involved with. So yeah, I think that on that note, thank you to everyone who survived this long and
it was great,
got through it, and thank you to you guys for sitting in on it. And
thanks for having us on the show, Rob.
Yeah, thanks, Rob. Appreciate you inviting us on.
Thank you, Rob. Right? Tune in next week for another episode of Hangar Z podcast with hopefully not your host, Rob Munday. This will be a one-time deal. But thanks everyone for listening. Appreciate it.
Thank you for joining us for this episode of the Hangar Z podcast, brought to you by Vertical Helicasts and in partnership with Vertical Valor Magazine. We hope you found our discussion on the pathways into public safety aviation both informative and inspiring. Whether you're interested in airborne law enforcement, aerial firefighting, or becoming a search and rescue technician, the insights shared by Rob Munday, Stef, Maier, Mike Calhoun, and Dave Callen shed light on the essential skills and experiences that can pave your way into this rewarding field. Remember, the journey into public safety aviation is as much about personal initiative, training, and building connections as it is about technical skills. As you navigate your own path, don't underestimate the power of mentorship and networking. These relationships can be invaluable in helping you reach your goals. If you enjoyed this episode of the Hangar Z podcast, be sure to subscribe and share it with anyone looking to take their first steps in this exciting career field. Cheers.
You protect and defend. So do we. Astronautics' proven cybersecurity, connectivity, and upgrade solutions support helicopter OEMs and operators worldwide. When the mission matters, you need to trust that your avionics systems are secure, connected, and reliable, because lives depend on it. Continue to protect and defend. So will we. Contact Astronautics at www.astronautics.com. Thank you to our sponsor, Robinson Helicopter Company, the choice for unrivaled safety and reliability, so you can accomplish any mission with confidence. For more than half a century, Robinson has been at the forefront of the helicopter industry. From the R-22 to the R-66 turbine, Robinson makes helicopters accessible so more people can accomplish more missions. Climb higher. For additional information, visit www.robinsonheli.com. Thank you to our sponsor, Shotover. Shotover Systems is the leading developer and manufacturer of high-performance gyro-stabilized cameras with advanced real-time AR mapping and mission management, all backed by unparalleled custom training and support. Now offering the M2 multi-sensor system, Sol 6-axis EO/IR platform with 4K Ultra HD color and infrared technology. Ideal for law enforcement and defense. Offered with real-time AR overlays to quickly identify streets, weather, and traffic. Automated license plate recognition, 24 megapixel digital photographs, and automated steering and tracking.
Thank you for joining us for this episode of the Hangar Z podcast, brought to you by Vertical Helicasts and in partnership with Vertical Valor magazine. We hope you found our discussion on the pathways into public safety aviation both informative and inspiring. Whether you're interested in airborne law enforcement, aerial firefighting, or becoming a search and rescue technician, the insights shared by Rob Munday, Stef, Maier, Mike Calhoun, and Dave Callen shed light on the essential skills and experiences that can pave your way into this rewarding field. Remember, the journey into public safety aviation is as much about personal initiative, training, and building connections as it is about technical skills. As you navigate your own path, don't underestimate the power of mentorship and networking. These relationships can be invaluable in helping you reach your goals. If you enjoyed this episode of the Hangar Z podcast, be sure to subscribe and share it with anyone looking to take their first steps in this exciting career field. Cheers.
Time to close up the hangar. Thanks for joining us on the Hangar Z podcast, brought to you by Vertical Helicasts.